Good morning and welcome to Introductory Logic Lesson 9. We're going to be talking about relationships between statements. So we're starting to move into the more complex, more fun part of logic where we are getting into different kinds of statements and how they relate to one another. There are 4 different relationships that we're going to be talking about with these statements. But before we do this, this is not technically part of this lesson, but I think it can be helpful to go ahead and show you guys this, which is what we're going to be moving into. This is a very bare, let me move this down, bare bones square of opposition. There's a lot more that's going to be going into this, but this is called the square of opposition. And if you notice, there's 4 different types of statements here. And real quick, all SRP, no SRP, some SRP, some S are not P. And once we fill in this square of opposition, we're going to be putting in the relationships between those and how you can test using the square of opposition for truth. What implies truth, what implies falsity between statements and the relationships between one another. That's not part of this lesson, but it's cool to go ahead and see that because part of this does tie in to the relationships that will go on to the square of opposition. And I wanted to go ahead and show you that and also show you where they're placed on there, and that there's 4 basic categorical statements that we use for logic. That's jumping ahead, but it's helpful. All right, so moving on to our relationships between statements. The first relationship that we have is called consistency. This means that both can be true at the same time. There's no conflict between them. And all of these, we're talking about 2 statements. So we'll have 2 statements and we're looking at the relationship between 2 statements, not more than 2. So with consistency, both statements can be true at the same time. There's no conflict between them. And if you can think of this relationship as the friend relationship, there's no conflict. They get along with each other and they can both be true at the same time. Here's an example of this. Paul was an apostle. The apostle Paul was never in Germany. So both of those can be true. One doesn't, there's no conflict, so one wouldn't make the other one false. Here's another one. This is my snake. This snake is venomous. So as you can see with both sets of those examples, they can both be true at the same time. Now, if there is conflict, this would be an inconsistent relationship. So this means that there is conflict between these 2 statements and they cannot both be true. And as relationship goes, if you can think of this one as the enemy relationship, because there's conflict there. So, that an example of this one might be the Apostle Paul was never in Germany. The Apostle Paul, most of Apostle Paul's work was in Germany. So those 2 can't be true at the same time. They conflict with each other. All right, so that's relationship number 1, consistency. Relationship number 2 is called implication. Now, the implication occurs when the truth of one statement requires the truth of the second statement. For an example, that man has a son. That man is a father. So we have the first statement, that man has a son, automatically implies that that man is a father. Now here's another one, and this one might trick you, and this is why I wanted to go ahead and show you the square of opposition. All Christians are followers of Jesus. Some Christians are followers of Jesus. Now, it's very important to distinguish in logic how the word some is used. In common conversation, when we talk about some things are like this, we imply, we think, that when we use the word some, we're contrasting between some and the others. But in logic, this is not the case. And I'll show you pictures and how this can be so later on, but just know that in logic, it's not like common language when we use the word some. So if I say some Christians are followers of Jesus, I am not implying that some are not. I'm not looking at a contrast there. I'm looking at a part of a whole. So that's very important to know. And all Christians are followers of Jesus would imply that some Christians are followers of Jesus. Again, that'll make sense later on. Just know that in logic, some does not mean that some are not. Okay. And this is another example of a later lesson where we can say if P, then Q. P would be the first statement, Q would be the second statement, therefore Q. So P, the first statement, implies Q, which is the second statement. It's important to note also that the Q does not imply P. The second statement doesn't imply the first statement. It only goes one way. There's not a mutual implication. Only one sentence, the first sentence implies the second. And I'll explain this. So for example, it might seem like with our first example, that man has a son, that man is a father. That man has a father implies the first, but it actually, if you think about it, it doesn't, because it could be a daughter instead of a son. So with implication, the truth of one statement requires the truth of the second statement, but it cannot flip-flop. The relationship picture that we can help remind us of implication would be a big brother, little brother relationship. So wherever big brother is, little brother is sure to be there too. And remember, the little brother follows the big brother. The big brother doesn't follow the little brother. So we don't reverse implication between the statements. Only one implies the other. They can't flip-flop and it imply each other. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 relationship, logical equivalence. This relationship means that, oh my gosh, I can't read my writing again. They imply one another. Good grief, sorry. Okay, so with logical equivalence, both statements imply one another. So both can be true or both can be false. So this is like implication times 2. The first sentence implies the second sentence, and the second sentence implies the first sentence. So an example here would be, no Christians are Buddhists. No Buddhists are Christians. Now, as I said before, if you remember an implication, one implies the other, but they cannot flip-flop. With logical equivalence, these two statements can imply one another, which is different than implication. However, it's important to know that not all statements can flip-flop. The ones that cannot, the ones that can switch the subject and the predicate and it be a logical equivalence relationship are, if we go back to this here, all right, so let's see, the no SRP and some SRP. These are the only types of statements where you can switch the predicate with the subject and vice versa, and they still imply one another. They're equivalent. So for an example of one that would not work, so if the only ones that can work are no SRP and some SRP, the ones that cannot work are all SRP and some S are not P. So I'm going to give you an example of when this does not work so you can maybe see it a little bit better. All artists are impoverished people. Does not equal the same thing. All impoverished people are artists. So that is kind of gives you an example of how you can switch the subject and the predicate and it wouldn't be true. Not all impoverished people are artists. Some impoverished people are not artists. So if that makes sense. So this relationship can best be remembered if you think of a marriage or twins, however you want to picture that they're so close they're almost the same. So with this one, you can switch the subject and the predicate, and they can both be true and they can both be false. But the only statements that you can do that with are the no statements and the some statements. Again, this will make more sense as we go on. This is just an introduction to these different types of relationships here. All right, so fourth and last relationship we're going to talk about is the relationship of independence. So the truth or falsity of one statement has no effect on the truth or falsity of the other. So they have nothing to do with each other. How you can test for whether or not the statements are independent of one another is there's two things that have to take place. Neither can imply the other. So this means it cannot necessitate truth. So one statement cannot necessitate the truth of another. And if you recall, this would be implication. That would be an implication relationship if one necessitates the truth of the other. So that cannot happen in an independent relationship. And number two test, they must be consistent. So this means, and it might be kind of confusing, well, consistency is a form of relationship. This just means that if they're inconsistent, it could necessitate a falsity. So the first test necessitates truth, and the second test necessitates falsity. Again, we'll get into this more later. So basically, to recap, the test is 1, neither can imply the other, and 2, they both must be consistent. Because if there's an inconsistency, there's a conflict there. Here's an example. All Christians have had their sins forgiven. All tricycles have 3 wheels. Neither of these statements imply the other. Neither conflicts with one another, and so they're independent. They're both true, but they have nothing to do with each other. So the relationship that can help you remember this one would be the stranger relationship. They do not impact one another whatsoever. They can be true, they can be false, but they don't imply truth to the other, and they don't imply falsity to the other. They have nothing to do with each other. So those are the 4 relationships. To recap, we have first is consistency. These can both be true at the same time. There's no conflict between them. This is the friend relationship. Number 2 is implication. The truth of one statement requires the truth of the other statement. And this relationship is the big brother, little brother relationship. Number 3, logical equivalence. They both imply one another. So they can both be true or they can both be false. And this relationship is best remembered as the marriage relationship or the twin, however you want to think of it, where they're so close they're basically the same. Number 4 relationship is independence. And this one is the truth or falsity of one statement has no effect on the truth or falsity of the other statement. And this can best be remembered by the stranger relationship. They have no impact on one another. So that is it for lesson 9, relationships between statements. And we'll see you again for a later lesson.